Hi everybody, in this video I'm going to take you through John Keats's Eve of St Agnes. It's quite a long poem, so settle in for a longer video than usual. I would suggest that you have a copy of the poem in front of you and you have pens and highlighters so that you can annotate as we go. Okay, first of all, let's start with the context of the poem. It was written in 1819, published in 1820. Now, this is during a period of time that was very difficult for Keats because he was haunted by the deaths of his mother and his brother. Keats's mother died when he was 14. His brother had died in 1818, and Keats had nursed his brother through his illness, which was tuberculosis. Keats, by this point, was also aware that he himself was very gravely ill and he was to die shortly after this as well. So there's a real sense of kind of impending death and downfall in Keats's poems from this time period, and that's probably in some way a reaction to his own awareness of his kind of frail mortality. In terms of the form of the poem, it's written in Spenserian stanzas. Now, this comes from a poet called Edmund Spenser, who was writing in the Renaissance period, and Spenser wrote a beautiful epic poem called The Fairy Queen in the 1590s. Very, very long, so if you're going to read that, I would suggest that you set aside quite a bit of time, but it is a beautiful poem. And when we talk about chivalry and knights and romantic love and kind of ideal relationships at that time period, Spenser is really the person that we would go to for that. And the fact that Keats chooses to use Spenserian stanzas in this poem really adds to the sense that the events of the poem took place ages long ago, which is what it says at the end of the Eve of St Agnes. And there's a real sense that this poem is kind of consigned to history and is quite archaic in its diction as well. So we'll come back to all of this as we get into the poem. We also need to know about St Agnes Eve itself. So this is the 20th of January. St Agnes was the patron saint of virgins. She died as a martyr in the 4th century. And the poem itself is based on a folk belief that if a girl performs certain rites on this day, for example, she can't look behind her over her shoulder, then she will see her future husband in a dream that night. And in the poem, the main character, Madeline, is going through these rites because she hopes that she will dream of her future husband. In terms of the narrative, then, we have a frame narrative in this poem. A frame narrative is where you start and end with a particular story, but then the main narrative at the centre of the story is linked but a little bit different. So in this particular poem, we have a beadsman or a religious figure in the frame narrative. So the first few stanzas and the final stanza of the poem tell his story. But the main section of the poem, the central section of it, as it were, is the story of Madeline and Porphyro. And you see frame narratives quite often in literature of this time period. For example, Frankenstein has a frame narrative. You have a sailor in the first and kind of final chapters, and then at the centre of the story, you have the story of Frankenstein's monster. We also see a kind of partial frame narrative in Keats's poem La Belle Dame sans Merci. It starts with an unnamed speaker, and it seems as if Keats is kind of setting up this frame narrative, and then we move to the central story of the knight at arms and the fairy that he meets, the lady and the maids that he meets. But then we don't actually return to the frame narrative at the end of that poem. So in La Belle Dame, Keats breaks that frame and leaves the ending very ambiguous. In the Eve of St Agnes, he starts the frame with the beadsman, and then the beadsman, no spoilers, well, actually, I'm going to give you a spoiler here, the beadsman dies in the final stanza. So we do have that frame to kind of finish off the poem in the Eve of St Agnes. So we start with the beadsman in prayer, and then we shift into the castle. We gradually get closer to the centre of the castle as the poem proceeds. And Madeline's family are having a feast while she is performing the rites of the Eve of St Agnes. Then she goes to bed. So again, we move in space. So we get closer to the heart of the castle into her private bedchamber. Unknown to Madeline, while she's at the party and while she's doing the rites of the Eve of St Agnes, the elderly Angela helps Porphyro sneak into the castle. Porphyro then enters Madeline's bedchamber and watches her undress. He prepares a feast and he kisses her in her sleep, and then he melts into her dream. you can take that euphemism for what it is. Then Madeline awakes, she's horrified with the kind of harsh reality of the situation, and the couple flee into the storm. Now, as you can probably already tell from that summary, the story itself is quite problematic, especially in terms of the question of consent. So we'll get onto that as we read the poem. Okay, let's go through it. As I said earlier, I suggest that you have a pen and a highlighter and a copy of the poem so that you can annotate it as we go. This is the frame narrative then. The first three stanzas of the poem are about the beadsman, and the beadsman is a religious figure. His duty is to pray for his employer, to do penance for sins. This really juxtaposes with the stanzas that follow, where his employer is having a huge, rather raucous party. So the kind of sin and excess of that party is supposed to be offset by the fact that the beadsman is saying prayers for the family. So we'll read the first stanza. St. Agnes Eve, a bitter chill it was, the oil for all his feathers was cold. The hare limped trembling through the frozen grass, and silent was the flock in woolly fold. Numb were the beadsman's fingers while he told his rosary, and while his frosted breath, like pious incense from a censer old, seemed taking flight for heaven without a death, past the sweet Virgin's picture, while his prayer he saith. So there's two things we kind of notice in the first stanza. The first thing is the semantic field of cold. So it's chill, it's cold, it's frozen, it's numb, it's frosted. We see that in the second stanza as well. And here we have a real sense of stasis, of endings, of death, of being in the middle of winter. And that links in again to the La Belle Dame sans Merci, where the sedge is withered from the lake and no birds sing because we're at the end of autumn and we're entering winter. In the Eve of St. Agnes, this contrasts really sharply with the warmth and the sensuousness that we have at the heart of the poem, particularly in Madeline's bedchamber. In La Belle Dame sans Merci, it contrasts with the elfin grot, where again we have warmth and sensuousness in that poem. The second semantic field we notice in the first stanza is a religious one. So we have the beadsman, we have his rosary, the pious incense, heaven, the Virgin's picture. So there's a real strong sense of religion here. And there's no mistake that religion at this point of the poem is associated with death and stasis and winteriness and tradition. It seems very cold, very unproductive. Keats does not seem to be in favour of religion here. Second stanza then, so his prayer he saith, this patient holy man, then takes his lamp and riseth from his knees, and back returneth meagre, barefoot wan, along the chapel aisle by slow degrees. The sculptured head on each side seemed to freeze, imprisoned in black purgatorial rails, knights, ladies praying in dumb oratories. He passeth by and his weak spirit feels, to think how they may ache in icy hoods and mails. Notice how weak the beadsman is. He's meagre, he's barefoot, he's moving really slowly, his weak spirit fails. This is a figure who is coming close to death. Third stanza, northward he turneth through the little door, and scarce 3 steps ere music's golden tongue flattered to tears this aged man and poor. Okay, look at the juxtaposition now. We've had the cold, the stasis, everything's frozen, everything's about death, and now we have music's golden tongue. It's just a little hint of what's to come in the poem. A hint of the kind of beauty, the gloriousness of the senses that Keats is going to celebrate. So we have a juxtaposition between death and life and vitality at this point. Now this aged man and poor, but no, already had his death bell rung. The joys of all his life were said and sung. His was harsh penance on St. Agnes Eve. Another way he went, and soon among rough ashes sat he for his soul's reprieve, and all night kept awake for sinners' sake to grieve. Now, if you're reading this because you're studying this as a tragic poem, what you'll notice is the real inevitability of death here, and that's really the effect of that frame narrative. Keats frames the beauty of the centre of the poem with impending death, inevitable death, because this beadsman in the final stanza is going to pass away. Moving into the central section of the poem then, here we have the party, the feast that Madeline's family are hosting, and she's going through the rites of St. Agnes Eve. So the first stanza on the screen here, that ancient beadsman heard the prelude soft, and so it chanced for many a door was wide, from hurry to and fro. Soon up aloft the silver snarling trumpets gan to chide, the level chambers ready with their pride were glowing to receive 1,000 guests. The carved angels, ever eager-eyed, stared where upon their heads the cornice rests, with hair blown back and wings put crosswise on their breasts. At length burst in the ancient revelry, with plumed tiara and all rich array, numerous as shadows haunting ferally the brain new stuffed in youth with trumpets gay of old romance. These let us wish away, and turn sole thoughted to one lady there, whose heart had brooded and all that wintry day on love and winged St. Agnes' saintly care, as she had heard the old dames full many times declare. So this kind of entrance of Madeline into the poem comes alongside the description of the party. And I always remember my A-level English teacher talking to us about the silver snarling trumpets. It's almost oxymoronic because we've got the silver, which is the beauty, the excess, the kind of sensuous indulgence, the wealth that this family have, contrasted very sharply with the snarling trumpets and this sense of kind of latent danger, of imminent doom that's kind of captured in that word snarling. There's a real sense here that we have a social veneer, a social facade that's covering up some kind of underlying violence and hatred. And that comes through later in the poem. So when Porphyro sneaks in, we learn that he's got to sneak through the party, that he actually can't get legitimately engaged to Madeline because there's a feud between his family and Madeline's family. So this kind of sense of danger and violence underlies the whole poem. In the third stanza on the screen then, Keats introduces the story of St. Agnes. So they told her how upon St. Agnes' Eve young virgins might have visions of delight, and soft adorings from their loves receive upon the honeyed middle of the night. If ceremonies due they did aright. So on St. Agnes' Eve, virgins, so unmarried girls, might have a vision of their future husbands if they do the ceremonies correctly. Top of the second column here, it tells us what those ceremonies are. So supperless to bed they must retire, so they can't eat anything, and couch supine their beauties lily white, nor look behind nor sideways, so they can't look behind themselves, but require of heaven with upward eyes for all that they desire. So they've got to look up, they've got to appeal to heaven. And this kind of introduces the real sense of innocence and the heavenly imagery that's associated with Madeline. All the way through the poem, Keats seems really kind of at pains to emphasize her purity, her innocence, her beauty, her perfection, her piousness. And in that sense, she seems quite out of place at the feast and the dancing that her family hold. She doesn't seem quite into this party, and she's almost presented as being a saint, and later on Porphyro is described as being the pilgrim. Is perhaps a reference to Romeo and Juliet, which we kind of see all the way through the poem. I've mentioned already that there's a feud between Porphyro's family and Madeline's family, which is very Romeo and Juliet. He can't legitimately propose to her, again like Romeo and Juliet. And also in that play by Shakespeare, when Romeo and Juliet first talk, the word pilgrim is used to describe Romeo. So perhaps these allusions to Romeo and Juliet are there. And actually, the fact that that earlier play is a tragedy in which both lovers die really adds a sense of the inevitability of the downfall of Madeline and Porphyro in this particular poem. Anyway, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So, full of this whim was thoughtful Madeline. So the fourth stanza on the screen. Full of this whim was thoughtful Madeline. The music yearning like a god in pain she scarcely heard. Her maiden eyes divine, fixed on the floor, saw many a sweeping train pass by. She heeded not at all. In vain came many a tiptoe amorous cavalier and back retired, not cooled by high disdain, but she saw not, her heart was otherwise. She sighed for Agnes' dreams, the sweetest of the year. So thoughtful Madeline is thinking about the eve of St. Agnes. She scarcely heard the music that's at this ball. Her maiden eyes divine, so she's kind of totally taken over by this religious idea that if she prays and does the right things with St. Agnes, then she will see her future husband that night in a dream. Lots of dashing young men come up to Madeline to ask her to dance. So it says in that stanza, in vain came many a tiptoe amorous cavalier. So a cavalier, those dashing young men, and back retired. So she sends them away. She's not even speaking to these other men. She's not interested in them. She wants to have the vision that night. Final stanza on this slide then. So she danced along with vague, regardless eyes. So because she's kind of seeing into herself, because she's so focused on her plan, she's not seeing the reality of the world that she's living in. She danced along with vague, regardless eyes, anxious her lips, her breathing quick and short. The hallowed hour was near at hand. She sighs amid the timbrels. So the hallowed hour, that kind of holy hour where she will have that vision, is near at hand. It's almost there. She sighs amid the timbrels. The timbrels are an instrument. So she seems a little bit fed up with this ball. The thronged resort of whispers in anger, awe, and sport, mid looks of love, defiance, hate, and scorn, hoodwinked with fairy fancy. So she's just totally ignoring all of the whispers and the chat and all of the gossip that's at this ball. All a mort save to St. Agnes and her limbs unshorn, and all the bliss to be before tomorrow morn. So she's getting herself ready for that kind of ceremony, that vision in the evening. After this, we switch to Angela and Porphyro, and this is where Porphyro is sneaking into the castle. This is the Romeo and Juliet bit, so Porphyro can't legitimately come into the castle because he is in a feud with Madeline's family. So, proposing each moment to retire, she lingered still. Meantime, across the moors had come young Porphyro with heart on fire for Madeline. So he's absolutely obsessed with love, with passion for Madeline. Beside the portal doors, buttressed from moonlight, stands he, and implores all saints to give him sight of Madeline. But for one moment in the tedious hours that he might gaze and worship, all unseen, perchance speak, kneel, touch, kiss, in sooth such things have been. Okay, what we notice here is that he is treating Madeline as a saint, as a kind of idol that he could just gaze upon. But notice in that final line in this stanza the progression of verbs. So speak, kneel, touch, kiss. It becomes more physical as the line goes on. Second stanza on the screen. He ventures in, let no buzzed whisper tell. All eyes be muffled, or 100 swords will storm his heart. So again, Romeo and Juliet, we have the feud here. He will be killed if Madeline's family find him in this castle. Love's feverous citadel for him, those chambers held barbarian hordes, hyena foemen and hot-blooded lords, whose very dogs with execrations howl against his lineage. Not one breast affords him any mercy in that mansion foul, save one old beldam, weak in body and in soul. Notice, I was going to say undertones, it's not really undertones, it's quite obvious, isn't it? Notice the violence, the kind of anger, the danger that's really emphasized in this stanza. It's hinted at earlier on in the poem, but it really comes to the fore at that point. So again, this sense of inevitable doom, destruction, chaos, which is barely controlled as the family have this celebration. Third stanza on the screen, Angela arrives. She's the aged creature. She's going to help Porphyro sneak in. So, happy chance, the aged creature came, shuffling along with ivory-headed wand, to where he stood, hid from the torch's flame, behind a broad half-pillar far beyond the sound of merriment and chorus bland. He startled her, but soon she knew his face, and grasped his fingers in her palsied hand, saying, Mercy, Porphyro, hie thee from this place. They are all here tonight, the whole bloodthirsty race. So, like the beadsman, Angela is very elderly and she's quite pearly as well. She has a palsied hand, so we get a sense of age, of death approaching. And she warns Porphyro, get out of this castle because these people will kill you if they find you here. Fourth stanza on the screen. Get hence, his dwarfish Hildebrand. He had a fever late, and in the fit he cursed thee and thine, both house and land. I just love the melodrama of this stanza. Then there's that old Lord Morris, not a whit more tame for his grey hairs. Alas me, flit like a ghost away. I gossip, dear, was safe enough. Here in this armchair sit and tell me how. So this is Porphyro's voice coming in. He's saying, don't worry about it. It's all going to be fine. And she replies, good saints, not here, not here. Follow me, child, or else these stones will be thy bier. So a bier is I don't want you to carry a dead body on. So she's saying, look, take me seriously. You're in danger here, Porphyro. Final stanza on the screen. He followed through a lowly arched way, brushing the cobwebs with his lofty plume. And as she muttered, well a day, he found him in the little moonlight room, pale, lattice, chill, and silent as a tomb. Notice here a return to the kind of language that we have in the frame narrative. Everything's very cold, very frozen. There's a real sense of stasis and winter and endings and death. Silent as a tomb. That simile is no mistake from Keats. He's sprinkling kind of references to death all the way through this poem to make the doom of the lovers at the end seem really inevitable. Now tell me where is Madeline, said he. Oh, tell me, Angela, by the holy loom, which none but secret sisterhood may see, when they St. Agnes wool are weaving piously. So he's saying, in short, where is Madeline? St. Agnes, it is St. Agnes Eve, yet men will murder upon holy days. Thou must hold water in a witch's sieve, and be liege lord of all the elves and fays to venture so. It fills me with amaze to see thee, Porphyro. So Angela is amazed to see Porphyro in the castle. St. Agnes Eve, God's help! My lady fair the conjurer plays this very night. Good angels her deceive, but let me laugh a while, I've mickle time to grieve. So she tells Porphyro that Madeline is going through the rites of St. Agnes Eve. Feebly she laugheth in the languid moon, while Porphyro upon her face doth look, like puzzled urchin on an aged crone, who keepeth closed a wondrous riddle book, as spectacle she sits in chimney nook. So Porphyro's looking at her confused. He's a puzzled urchin. He doesn't understand what she's saying. But soon his eyes grew brilliant when he told his lady's purpose. So his eyes grow brilliant. They start to shine when he realizes what Madeline is doing that night. And he scarce could brook tears at the thought of those enchantments cold and Madeline asleep in lap of legends old. So this is where the seed of the idea comes in. Madeline is doing the rites of the Eve St. Agnes so that she can dream of the man she's going to marry, and Porphyro thinks, right, I'm going to sneak into her room and make sure that it's me that she dreams of. So this is Porphyro sneaking into the bedchamber. Sudden a thought came like a full-blown rose, flushing his brow, and in his pained heart made purple riot. So the pained heart, this is the suffering of unrequited love that we see in the poem. Then doth he propose a stratagem that makes the beldam start. So he puts forward a strategy, and the beldam Angela is so surprised and horrified by what he says that she jumps out of her skin. A cruel man and impious thou art. Sweet lady, let her pray and sleep and dream alone with her good angels, far apart from wicked men like thee. Go, go, I deem thou canst not surely be the same that thou didst seem. Okay, now this is interesting because until now Porphyro is the hero of the piece. He genuinely loves Madeline. He's the Romeo figure. He's a pilgrim who wants to come and worship at her shrine, and he wants to honour her. And when he suggests that he's going to sneak into Madeline's bedroom, this starts to make Angela really uneasy, and she says, you're cruel, you're wicked. Now, one thing that we're going to talk about when we get later in the poem is the question of consent. And there is something really unsettling about Porphyro sneaking unknown into Madeline's bedchamber so that he can manipulate the situation. Think about the knight in La Belle Dame sans Merci. The knight is presenting himself as the victim of a dangerous enchantment, but actually, does he manipulate the fairy child? Is he actually the villain of that piece? Is Porphyro a villain in this particular poem? Anyway, let's keep going. Next stanza. I will not harm her, by all saints I swear, quoth Porphyro. Oh, may I never find grace when my weak voice shall whisper its last prayer, if one of her soft ringlets I displace, or look with ruffian passion in her place. So he says he's not going to hurt her. He would never even dare to displace, to touch one of her soft ringlets. Yeah, right. Wait for what's happening later in the poem. He's not even going to look in her face with any passion. He's just going to be there in the room. Good Angela, believe me by these tears, or I will, even in a moment's space, awake with horrid shout my foeman's ears. So if I'm lying to you, I will let all of Madeline's family know that I'm here, and they can kill me, and bid them know they be more fanged than wolves and bears. And this is Angela's reply. Ah, why wilt thou affright a feeble soul? poor, weak, palsy-stricken churchyard thing whose passing bell may hear the midnight toll. So she's saying, why are you frightening me so much? I'm feeble, I'm weak, my passing bell might happen tonight, as in she might die tonight. Whose prayers for thee each morn and evening were never missed. Thus planning doth she bring a gentler speech from burning Porphyro, so woeful and of such deep sorrowing that Angela gives promise she will do whatever he shall wish, betide her weal or woe. So Porphyro manages to persuade Angela to help him with his plan. Final stanza on the screen. The plan was to lead him in close secrecy even to Madeline's chamber, and there hide him in a closet of such privacy that he might see her beauty unespied, and win perhaps that night a peerless bride. So he wants to look at her in all of her beauty, and he wants Madeline to see him, and to somehow confuse that with the rites of the Eve of St. Agnes, and to see him as her future husband. While legion fairies paced the coverlet and pale enchantment held her sleepy-eyed. Now, I've highlighted this just to kind of point out the enchanting language, the supernatural language here, which juxtaposes somewhat with the religious language that we've got in the poem, but that's actually quite well connected with the the supernatural diction that we have in La Belle Dame sans Merci. Never on such a night have lovers met, since Merlin paid his demon all the monstrous debt. It shall be as thou wished, said the dame. So Angela agrees. All cates and dainties shall be stored there quickly on this feast night. So there will be glorious food to have some kind of feast in Madeline's chamber. By the tambour frame her own lute thou will see. So in the bedroom you will see Madeline's musical instrument, and lute is a stringed musical instrument. So a feast and a musical instrument can now be added to this situation. No time to spare, for I am slow and feeble, and scarce dare on such a catering trust my dizzy head. Wait here, my child, with patience, kneel in prayer the while, and thou must needs the lady wed, or may I never leave my grave among the dead. So she's saying, right, we'll do all of this. You can sneak into her room, you can have a feast, you can play her musical instrument, you can look at the beautiful lady asleep in her bed, and let's hope that you wed her, let's hope that you marry her after all of this. So saying, she hobbled off with busy fear. The lovers' endless minutes slowly passed. The dame returned and whispered in his ear to follow her. So Angela's gone and got everything ready, and now Porphyro is going to go into Madeline's bedchamber with aged eyes aghast from fright of dim espial. So she's frightened. She doesn't want to be espied. She doesn't want to be seen or found out in what she's doing. Save at last, through many a dusky gallery, they gain the maiden's chamber. Look at the word maiden there, really emphasising Madeline's innocence, her perfection, her purity, her virginity at this point. The maiden's chamber, silken, hushed and chaste. It's like Keats is describing a saint's chapel here. It's hushed and chaste. Chaste is a word that we see quite a lot. Kind of from the Renaissance period through to the Victorian period. It's fallen out of favour somewhat in the 20th and 21st centuries, but chaste means that someone is sexually pure. So before marriage, a girl wouldn't have sex, but then after marriage, she could have sex with her husband. So very much kind of presenting Madeline as the perfect, pure woman here. Where Porphyro took covert, so covert as in he's hiding, pleased amain, his poor guide hurried back with agues in her brain. So Angela runs away and she's distressed by what she has done. Then Madeline comes into the room. Porphyro is hiding in the cupboard. Her faltering hand upon the balustrade, old Angela was feeling for the stair, when Madeline, St. Agnes' charmed maid, rose like a mission spirit unaware. With silver tapers light and pious care she turned, and down the aged gossip led to safe level matting. Now prepare young Porphyro for gazing on that bed. She comes again, like ringdove frayed and fled. Notice the kind of religious saintly diction here: unaware, pious, ringdove. A dove symbolizes peace and love and innocence. It's associated with Jesus in the Bible. Next stanza, out went the taper as she hurried in. So her candle gets blown out as she goes in the room. Its little smoke in pallid moonshine died. Okay, kind of hint of danger, of death here. The word pallid means kind of pale and sickly. She closed the door, she panted, all akin to spirits of the air and visions wide, no uttered syllable or woe betide. But to her heart was voluble, so her heart was speaking, voluble means speaking, haining with eloquence her balmy side, as though a tongueless nightingale should swell her throat in vain, and die heart stifled in her dell. Now, the tongueless nightingale is a really important symbol in Keats's poetry. It's an allusion to Greek mythology, to a story where a girl called Philomel is raped by her brother-in-law. In order to stop her from speaking out about what's happened to her, he cuts out her tongue. She suffers greatly, obviously, as a result of the rape and then the physical violence that's done to her afterwards. That silencing of her is a symbol of the marginalisation of women, their kind of violent subservience to men. And then the gods transform her into a nightingale in order to kind of ease her pain in some way. Um, so it's a story of rape, of sexual abuse, of a lack of consent, of exploitation, of the silencing of women. So yes, Madeline is kind of willingly doing the rights of the Eve of St. Agnes. Yes, she is beautiful. Yes, Porphyro seems to be in love with her genuinely. However, this kind of reference, this allusion to the Greek mythology is really deeply unsettling at this point, especially since Madeline doesn't know that Porphyro is in her bedchamber. And for Keats as well, the nightingale symbolises the imagination and transcendence above earthly suffering. He's got a beautiful poem called Ode to a Nightingale, and in that poem he looks up at the nightingale as a representation of someone who has suffered and then has been transformed into an animal who can sing beautifully and kind of rises above its earthly suffering. And in that poem, Ode to a Nightingale, Keats wishes that he could rise above the earthly suffering that he experiences with the death of his brother and with his own impending death as well. So there's a lot to unpack in that particular image. And it really, at this point, presents Madeline as a victim and Porphyro potentially as a villain at this point. So next stanza, a casement high and triple arch there was, all garlanded with carven imageries of fruit and flowers and bunches of knot grass, and diamonded with panes of quaint device, innumerable of stains and splendid dyes, as are the tiger moth's deep damasked wings. And in the midst, among thousand heraldries, and twilight stains and dim emblazonings, a shielded scutcheon blushed with blood of queens and kings. Now, this stanza really juxtaposes with the coldness, the frostiness, the kind of greyness and death that we have in the frame narrative with the beadsman. And it also juxtaposes with this image of the tongueless nightingale as an abused and kind of violated woman. And here Keats is really emphasizing kind of sensuous pleasure. Look at all of the colors, the references to nature, the kind of glorying in the beauty of the language as well. We've got lots of alliteration, the repetition of particular sounds, consonants and assonance all the way through this stanza. Like Keats is going all in terms of sensuous pleasure in this stanza. The next one then, full on this casement shone the wintry moon. So again, wintry, like the tongueless nightingale, it's another hint that there's something kind of unsettling, something slightly deathly going on here. Yet it threw warm gules on Madeline's fair breast. So yes, the moon is wintry, but as it floods in through the windows, it becomes warm. So there's almost a fight, I suppose, between life and death, winter and warmth, violence and pleasure and love going on in this section of the poem. As down she knelt for heaven's grace and boon, rose bloom fell on her hands together pressed. So she's kneeling down to pray, and on her silver cross soft amethyst, and on her hair a glory like a saint. Okay, notice that simile emphasizing Madeline's saintliness here. She seemed a splendid angel newly dressed, save wings for heaven. Porphyro grew faint. She knelt so pure a thing, so free from mortal taint. Mortal taint is a reference to original sin. So within Catholicism, there's a belief that humans are born already kind of imperfect, already sinning. And it's saying here that actually Madeline is so pious and so perfect, so saintly, that she doesn't even have that original sin. Final stanza on this screen, anon his heart revives, her vespers done. Of all its wreathed pearls, her hair she frees. So this is her getting undressed, unclaps her warm jewels one by one, loosens her fragrant bodice, so the top half of her dress. By degrees, her rich attire creeps rustling to her knees. So she's gradually pulling her dress down, half hidden like a mermaid in seaweed. Pensive awhile she dreams awake, and sees in fancy fair St. Agnes in her bed, but dares not look behind, or all the charm is fled. So she can't look back over her shoulder, otherwise she will ruin all of the rites and the rituals that she's done that evening, which means that she can't see Porphyro hidden in her closet watching her get undressed. It's a really disturbing, unsettling part of the poem. Soon trembling in her soft and chilliness, so she gets into bed, but looks soft and chilly. Again the winteriness, again the death, again the echoes of the beadsman from the frame narrative. In sort of wakeful swoon perplexed she lay, until the poppied warmth of sleep oppressed her soothed limbs. Now, I've highlighted all the references to sleep in the next few stanzas, because she goes to sleep, and what Porphyro does happens, it seems, while she is asleep. Until the poppied warmth of sleep oppressed her soothed limbs, and soul fatigued away, flown like a thought until the morrow day, blissfully havened both from joy and pain, clasped like a missile where swart pine nymphs pray, blinded alike from sunshine and from rain, as though a rose should shut and be a bud again. She's dead to the world, basically. She's totally and completely and utterly asleep, stolen to this paradise, and so entranced Porphyro gazed upon her empty dress and listened to her breathing. So is Porphyro a hero? Is he the villain? He's in her room looking at her dress. She doesn't know that he's there. He listens to her breathing. I don't know if there's echoes here of Othello, but it seems a little bit like that when Othello bends over Desdemona's body and listening to her breathing just before he smothers her. So if it chanced to wake into a slumberous tenderness, which when he heard that minute did he bless, and breathed himself, then from the closet crept noiseless as fear in a wild wilderness, and over the hushed carpet silent stepped, and tween the curtains peeped, where lo, how fast she slept. So Porphyro goes over to the bed, he pulls the curtains back, imagine a big four-poster bed with curtains round it, and he looks at Madeline sleeping. Then by the bedside where the faded moon, okay, look at the moon, it's been pallid earlier on, then it was wintry, now it's faded, just this motif all the way through this central section juxtaposes with the sensuous language and injects that sense of inevitable doom. Then by the bedside where the faded moon made a dim silver twilight, soft he set a table, and half anguished threw thereon a cloth of woven crimson, gold, and jet. So the faded moon juxtaposing with the warmth of these colours. And this is Porphyro setting out a tablecloth because he's going to prepare the feast. Oh, for some drowsy Morphean amulet, the boisterous midnight festive clarion, the kettle drum, the far-heard clarinet affray his ears, though but in dying tone, the hall door shuts again, and all the noise is gone. And still she slept in azure-lidded sleep, in blanched linen, smoothed and lavendered. So still Madeline is asleep. The blanched linen, the linen is white, so her bedclothes are very white, emphasizing her purity and her innocence. While he forth from the closet brought a heap, right, wait for this list of things, the different luxurious, exotic, gorgeous foods that he brings out. Heap of candied apple, quince and plum, and gourd with jelly soother than the creamy curd, and lucent syrups tinct with cinnamon, manna and dates and argosy transferred from fairs and spiced dainties every one, from silken Samarkand to seeded Lebanon. Like this is indulgence pure and simple in this feast. These delicates he heaped with glowing hand on golden dishes and in baskets bright of wreathed silver. Sumptuous they stand in the retired quiet of the night, filling the chilly room with perfume light. And now, my love, my seraph fair, awake. Thou art my heaven, and I thy Emerite, as in I'm your pilgrim. Open thine eyes for meek St. Agnes' sake, or I shall drowse beside thee, so my soul doth ache. Okay, so at this point it seems fine. He snuck into her room, he's prepared her a feast, and now he's waiting by the bed and he's waking her up. So he wants her to be awake. The slightly concerning thing is though I'm not going to record the video again. But that is my post arriving in my house. That is the sound of a new book dropping in my hallway floor. So sorry about that. But so the slightly concerning thing here, or the manipulative thing here, is that Porphyro knows when Madeline wakes up and sees him, she's going to think she's having a vision of her future husband. So, thus whispering, his warm and nerved arm sank in her pillow. Shaded was her dream by the dusk curtains. 'Twas a midnight charm, impossible to melt as ice its stream. I've picked this bit out to emphasize how fast asleep she is now at this point. He speaks to her, he tries to wake her up. She doesn't wake, she's still asleep. Impossible to melt as ice its stream. So she's totally and utterly frozen in this dream. The lustrous salvers in the moonlight gleam, broad golden fringe upon the carpet lies. It seemed he never, never could redeem from such a steadfast spell his lady's eyes. So mused awhile, entoiled in wolfed fantasies. So he can't wake her up, basically. Awakening up, so he has kind of gone into a bit of a trance while he thought, what am I going to do about this? She's not waking up. I've got this feast ready. I want her to fall in love with me, but she won't wake. So he's been in this kind of deep thought, and then he wakens up. So awakening up, he took her hollow lute. So remember I said this is a musical instrument that she has. It's a stringed instrument. He took her hollow lute tumultuous, and in chords that tenderest be, he played an ancient ditty long since mute, in Provence called La Belle Dame Sans Merci, close to her ear, touching the melody. So he starts playing this musical instrument, and he's playing a beautiful song. Except this particular song, if you've watched my video about La Belle Dame Sans Merci, is a song of failure in love, of passion gone wrong, of death and despair and suffering and loss. Not exactly the kind of thing you want to serenade your lover with. Anyway, finally, she starts to wake up. Wherewith disturbed, she uttered a soft moan. He ceased, she panted quick, and suddenly her blue, afraid eyes wide open shone. Upon his knees he sank, pale as smooth, sculptured stone. So she seems to wake up. However, her eyes were open, but she still beheld, now wide awake, the vision of her sleep. So she's awake, but she kind of thinks that she's in a vision. She thinks that she's asleep. She's been dreaming of Porphyro. She wakes up and Porphyro is there. So the exact status of her wakefulness or her sleepiness is kind of confused at this point. There was a painful change. That night expelled the blisses of her dream so pure and deep, at which fair Madeline began to weep and moan forth witless words and many a sigh, while still her gaze on Porphyro would keep, who knelt with joined hands and piteous eye. Fearing to move or speak, she looked so dreamingly. So she's been dreaming of Porphyro, she wakes up, and he's there. Surely this should be a good thing, but she starts crying and she's staring at him dreamingly. Is she awake or is she asleep? Is this a vision or is this real? Ah, Porphyro, says she. But even now thy voice was at sweet tremble in mine ear, made tunable with every sweetest vow, and those sad eyes were spiritual and clear. How changed thou art, how pallid, chill and drear. Now this is really important. She's had this beautiful dream, this beautiful vision, perfect, sensuous, indulgent, her perfect man in that dream, and now she wakes up and sees the reality. And all the way through Keats's poetry, we see this, the dream, the moment of transcendence, the moment of poetic inspiration, and then the reality comes in and it's suddenly taken away. So we see it in La Belle Dame Sans Merci. The knight has this kind of dream-like episode with the fairy child, and then he is kind of left on the cold hillside. The reality of his life is really chill, it's really drear. We see it in Isabella and the Pot of Basil. She has an almost dreamlike romance with her lover, who is then murdered, and the reality of her life is really dreadful. We see it in Lamia. At the end of the poem, the kind of beautiful world that Lamia has built for herself comes crashing down because philosophy will clip an angel's wings. The kind of flight of the soul, the transcendence of earthly problems is destroyed at the end of the poem. We see it in Ode to a Nightingale as well, where Keats looks up at the nightingale and thinks, I wish I could transcend my earthly cares like you do, but I can't. I'm here on earth as well. We see it all the way through Keats's poetry, the kind of harsh, crushing, disappointing reality in contrast to a moment of transcendence, of beautiful love, which is whipped away. So how changed thou art, how pallid, chill, and drear. Give me that voice again, my Porphyro, those looks immortal, those complainings dear. Oh, leave me not in this eternal woe, for if thou diest, my love, I know not where to go. Right, she's talking about death now. We've had those kind of seeds of death sown all the way through the poem, and now it comes back again. She's worried that she's not going to ever be able to love Porphyro properly, that he might die. Next stanza, beyond a mortal man in passion far at these voluptuous accents. So he finds her voice pretty sexy. Voluptuous accents. He arose, ethereal, flushed, and like a throbbing star, seen mid the sapphire heaven's deep repose. Into her dream he melted, as the rose blendeth its odour with the violet, solution sweet. Okay, so this is euphemistic. They make love. Now, the question of consent here is a really tricky one. If she's awake and she's told him that she essentially loves him, doesn't want him to leave her, then yes, in some senses she consents. However, into her dream he melted. She still thinks she's having a vision. He snuck into her bedchamber, so maybe this is not consent. So is he a villain? Is he a hero? It's quite ambiguous. It's quite unclear, just like the night situation in La Belle Dame sans Merci. And remember that kind of echo of the Nightingale story as well really kind of puts a question mark over this interaction. Meantime, the frost wind blows like love's alarum, pattering the sharp sleet against the window panes. St. Agnes' moon hath set. So doom is coming upon them. The end of their kind of happiness is inevitable because the winter is there, the frost wind is blowing, the moon has set, and kind of perfection, the dream, the vision, beauty and glory and love and romance, it's all about to be over, it's all about to be swept away. And that is the true tragedy of the poem. Next stanza. "'Tis dark, quick pattereth the floor-blown sleet. This is no dream, my bride, my Madeline. 'Tis dark, the ice gusts still rave and beat." Okay, so again, the juxtaposition of the dream and the reality. No dream? Alas, alas, and woe is mine. So here at this point, Madeline seems to really realise, I am awake, I am not dreaming here, this is what has just happened. So no dream, alas, alas, and woe is mine, Porphyro will leave me here to fade and pine. Cruel, what traitor could thee hither bring? I curse not, for my heart is lost in thine, though thou forsakest a deceived thing, a dove forlorn and lost with sick unpruned wing. So she sees herself at this point as being deceived. We've had her referred to as being a dove earlier on, which symbolises innocence and purity and peace, and now she's a dove forlorn. She's a bird that was flying, which has now been brought down to earth. My Madeline, sweet dreamer, lovely bride, say, may I be for aye thy vassal blest, thy beauty's shield, heart-shaped and vermeil dyed. At silver shrine here will I take my rest, after so many hours of toil and quest, a famished pilgrim, saved by miracle. Though I have found, I will not rob thy nest, saving of thy sweet self. If thou thinkst well to trust fair Madeline, to no rude infidel. So he says that when you come with me, can I still be yours? And then at the end of the poem, they flee from the castle. Hark, 'tis an elfin storm from fairy land, of high good seeming, but boon indeed. Arise, arise, the morning is at hand. The bloated wassailers will never heed. The bloated wassailers, that's her family who have overindulged. They are bloated with wine. Wassailers, as in they were partying pretty raucously. So they're so drunk, they're out of it. They'll never heed them. They'll never notice that she's running away. Let us away, my love, with happy speed. There are no ears to hear or eyes to see. Drowned all in Rhenish and the sleepy mead. Awake, arise, my love, and fearless be, for over the southern moors I have a home for thee. So he's going to take Madeline with him to where he's from, and they can have a home together. She hurried at his words, beset with fears, for there were sleeping dragons all around. So again, this sense of kind of latent violence in the setting. Her family, if they wake up, they will kill Porphyro. A glaring watch, perhaps, with ready spears, down the wide stairs a darkling way they find. In all the house was heard no human sound. A chain-drooped lamp was flickering by each door. The arras, rich with horsemen, hawk and hound, fluttered in the besieging wind's uproar, and the long carpets rose against the gusty floor. So chaos is really coming in at this point. We started the poem with the kind of religious order, and peace and calm of the beadsman. It wasn't attractive, but it was ordered. And now we have chaos. So we've got the drunkenness, we've got the lovers who are running away, we have got the storm kind of breaking into the castle, the wind's uproar almost seems to be coming into the castle, the floor has become gusty as the weather intrudes into the inside. Then they glide like phantoms into the wide hall. Notice that simile, like ghosts, like people who are dead. Not exactly striking a positive note at this point. They glide like phantoms into the wide hall, like phantoms to the iron porch they glide, where lay the porter in uneasy sprawl, with a huge empty flagon by his side. The wakeful bloodhound rose and shook his hide. But his sagacious eye an inmate owns. By one and one the bolts full easy slide, the chains lie silent on the foot-worn stones, the key turns and the door upon its hinges groans. So they come to the door, they undo the locks, they go out into the world. And they are gone. Aye, ages long ago, these lovers fled away into the storm. If you're thinking about tragedy, think about chaos, think about inevitable doom. The lovers have gone away. Yes, they're together. Yes, like Romeo and Juliet, unlike Romeo and Juliet, they haven't died, but they've run away into a storm from all that is kind of safe and comfortable and known. Doesn't exactly strike a positive note. That night the Baron dreamt of many a woe, and all his warrior guests with shade and form of witch and demon and large coffin worm will long be nightmared. Angela, the old, died as palsy twitched with meagre face deform. So Angela has died. The beadsman, after 1,000 aves told, for aye and sought for slept among his ashes cold, and the beadsman has died. So we return to the frame narrative there and that kind of sense of all-encompassing death. Okay, so transcendence, love, beauty are at the heart of the poem, but death kind of frames the poem. So we have at the heart of the poem that rich description of Madeline's room, her half-asleep interaction with Porphyro, but all of this is contrasted with her realization when she wakes. Porphyro is pallid, chill and drear, and that line is so important. It's about the harsh reality breaking in to the dream, to the moment of imagination. And what Keats is really saying in this poem is once the beauty of love or poetic inspiration is past, the reality of life is harsh and it's unfulfilling. If you're studying this poem in relation to tragedy, then think about these tragic elements. So what I'd recommend you do is, I've talked a lot, you've probably written down a lot of things on your copies of the poems. I'd recommend you stop the video and do a little mind map for each of these tragic elements, pull together quotations and ideas from what I've said, and perhaps link it into La Belle Dame sans Merci as well. Okay, thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope that was helpful.